I wonder, can these lights be all turned up a little bit, or are they on dimmers or no?
They're not on dimmers,
That's fine.
but I can do like 50%, if that would help.
Let's try that for a second. Just because I want to talk about some materials and things like that. See if
That's 50,
that's 50.
that's 100.
Is it 25? Okay.
I can work this better. I can't get them on.
Yeah, that's good there.
We can do that.
Oh, there you go. That helps a little bit.
We can do that.
Sconce light.
How are those lights going to reflect that?
It looks okay. Is that all right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Great.
All right.
So, yeah, thank you all for coming. Thanks to the archives for having me back again. My name is Chris Borton, and as was mentioned, I'm the director of Sage Mountain Center. We're an education and retreat center located outside of Butte, about 20 minutes from here, off the old highway, Highway 2, up by Toll Mountain. So everybody know where Toll Mountain Campground is, kind of back in there. We've been there about 30 years. My partner and I, Linda, started the center just kind of with this vision of building as sustainable as possible, using as much of the natural resources on site as possible. And it's been an amazing adventure. It was just bare land at that time, and we did basically an inventory of what the materials that were available in terms of rock, sun, wind, earth, and then let those materials dictate the types of buildings that we constructed up there. As we go along, I think feel free to ask questions. It's a shorter presentation, and so I think I can probably answer most of your questions. I come from 3 generations of building contractors, mostly conventional stick frame. But when I started getting into this project here, I wasn't doing building at the time. My interest was philosophy and religious studies and music. And so when it came time to build, I thought, oh, this doesn't look too hard. And I just kind of pulled from that construction gene that I had and started experimenting. Back 30 years ago, very few people were doing alternative construction stuff. You know, you hear about straw bale homes. Now tiny homes and mini homes are real popular right now. Cordwood was one, earthships, underground homes, all those different techniques. And Linda and I studied and visited and toured a lot of those places that were available. And we really settled on cordwood construction as our primary design because it fits the natural environment so well. You know, if you're out in the woods, anybody have a log home here or a log cabin or anything? One of you? A couple of you? Yeah. But out in the forest, it's a vernacular style of architecture. It blends in perfectly, and it's used with the materials that are available. Cordwood construction is the other kind of log home. We really don't hear a lot about it. All buildings have pros and cons. One of the challenges with log homes, which is what we wanted to do originally, is that they're not very well insulated. If you think of how the nature of a log is, you have 2 rounds, and when they're stacked, the point where the logs contact each other is very small. And that means heat and cold can migrate through that small area. And so you times that, times hundreds of logs in a building, and you essentially have a fairly uninsulated structure. It's beautiful, but again, in Montana, we're a heating climate, we need to retain the heat in the wintertime, and that's, as far as my mind, that's crucial for energy bills and for environmental purposes as well. So I've been doing a lot of study. Back then they didn't have the internet, so they had something called books. And so I would go to the library here in Butte, and I would spend a lot of time in the library. I would check out books. I would have them bring in books, and we would see what was available out there. Well, I stumbled on this really small, it was almost like a student manual that came out of Manitoba, Canada. And it was called Stack Wall. That's another name for cordwood construction. And so it was on stack wall construction. It had pencil drawings in it and stuff. And I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. And so I did a little mock-up wall just to kind of see what it was like, the materials. And sure enough, it was really simple to build. I mean, if you can do, basic firewood processing and stuff. 2 people could build it easily, and didn't involve cranes and big machinery like a regular log home. But the big plus is that it had a high insulation value. And so it could hold the heat really, really well in our cold winters. And this winter has been the test. We have had the most snow we've ever had in 30 years up at our place. And,
Did you take pictures? Are you going to show us pictures of it?
No, there's no pictures.
Oh.
They'll probably be posted on our website. Although I don't think right now any of us want to even think about snow right now. We want to see sunlight. So anyway, the interesting thing about cordwood is they're not sure of its history. It's the oldest cordwood structure has been located in Greece at about 1,000 years ago. But they think that immigrants coming over to North America brought the technique with them from Scandinavian countries and just started doing it here and there. And it's a really interesting technique because it never really caught on. I mean, there's quite a few now scattered around the country, but it's not like a regular log home or straw bale construction, which is very, very popular around the country and around the world. So anyway, this is our center here. This is what we call the main house at Sage Mountain Center. It's about 5,000 square feet. It has a large kitchen, a big meeting room, some guest rooms, a workshop, things like that. Our facility's all off-grid, so we're powered 100% from sun and wind power. We've been like that for 30 years. You can see our little wind generator up there and so forth. So anyway, let's move into this and see if this will go. Yes. So as you can already tell from cordwood construction or stack wall, it's essentially stacked firewood, right? I have some examples down here. The key with firewood, it's not as simple as it looks. Anybody cut firewood before here? That's it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know all about it. When you're using the log as a construction component, it's very different. Normally, you would see this log and you think, "Oh, this is. I'll put this in my fireplace and it'll give me some heat for a little bit." But as a building material, I'm looking at very specific things for this log. You can't just take your firewood and throw it up into a wall. I've seen that done before on some small cabins and it's disastrous. There's a technique for it, for sure. And so today I'll share a little bit about the techniques and kind of what's involved in it. Anyway, you can see on the picture on the right there, this is just one of our little wood sheds. And we've got a carport that we actually use just dry stacked logs as wind buffers for our cars, where we park our cars, or the plow truck at least outside. And you don't have to process it at all. You aside from cutting the tree down, cutting the logs, and then splitting them if you want to. Cordwood construction can be taken with the rounds or with the split logs. I like the split logs. If you look back here, well, it's kind of hard to see in that picture. The split logs look a little bit like stone from a distance, and aesthetically we really love that appearance. And then what I did is I bought one cord of timber ends at the lumber mill here in Butte, sawmill out on Harrison Avenue, and it was just their scrap material they were going to use for firewood, that they sell for firewood. And so, but what I liked is they were already squared out. So aesthetically, we incorporated squares, again, just to kind of give that little bit of a stone appearance. And we're really happy with the technique. A person could use all rounds, a person could use all squares, a person could use all splits, where you can see the wedges, like the firewood that's here on the table. It really just depends on what kind of look you want. Let's see here. So the first stage in cordwood construction is gathering your logs. And like I said, this is just like gathering firewood. You go out to the forest. One of the things that's really fascinating is that we're all aware of the beetle kill that's going on around our state and this whole area here. Those beetles have been killing the lodgepole pine. And the lodgepole pine, one, they have a very thin bark, which means when you're peeling those logs, they're really easy to peel. And again, if you've done firewood, you know the difference between the bark of lodgepole pine, which is this log here, compared to fir. They're both softwoods, but fir has a thicker bark. And if this log, as an example, dries and you try to peel this log, try to get that bark off, it's not going to happen. It's going to be so much labor to try to remove the bark from a fir tree. So what we're looking for, and fortunately, is these lodgepole pines that are all dead standing. There's the beetle kill. They're all out there. After about year one or after about year 2 or 3, that bark falls off because it's so thin. And guess what? No peeling. Or very little peeling. And peeling is the hardest part, really, of cordwood construction. Because you're handling and you're processing each one of these logs. I'm going to pass this around in a second. It might be a little dusty, so you can think about it if you want to handle it. But what's nice about lodgepole pine in our area is there's not a lot of knots. So the wood is pretty clean all throughout. When you're building the wall, it makes it very easy because it can be very uniform. Doug fir, aspen, you can build with any kind of wood. They'll tend to have more knots on them. And so when you're constructing a wall, these can be obstructions or the log might be twisted. And as you stack it up into place, it can be a little more difficult. So like in any building technique, uniformity is the best. And that's, oh, you're fine. And that's the beauty of, like I said, a lodgepole pine right now, and a beetle-killed log. It's funny, it's a tragedy that all these trees are dying, but those of us who work with logs, and particularly cordwood construction, it's like paradise time right now. So it is a plus. I'm just going to hand this around. You can take a peek at it. That's, like I said, a lodgepole pine. It's been a peeled log, and that's a really good log right there going around for construction. In the picture here, the fellow peeling this log is, he's peeling a Doug fir, which is that thicker bark. And it's quite a workout. He's got to work around the knots. You can see in the picture, here's a knot. There's some back here. And that just slows you down. This will become your best friend. Anybody know what this is? Drawn. Okay? And the way drawn ice work is you have your log, as it shows in the picture, and you just pull the bark off like this, and it cuts into it. I'll pass this around too. You can see this thing has built a lot of houses. But it's really sharp. So unless you're cutting your sandwich or something, be careful.
So Chris, on the log poles with the beetle kill, so the
Yep.
beetles just penetrate the bark and like crawl up. They're not like penetrating to the heart
Right.
of the
So-
tree. So you don't really have holes, but you have the trails, right?
Correct. You can have some holes into the structure of the tree, the wood itself, but they're interested in what's called the cambium layer.
Okay.
All trees have their bark, which you think of as the skin, and then right between the bark and the hard wood is the cambium layer, and that's where the life of the tree is. It's paper thin, and all the nutrients in a tree go up. Think of it as the circulatory system of the tree. So from the earth, it goes up right in that thin little layer. You can't even see it here, and that feeds the leaves or needles for photosynthesis. So the pine beetle bores into the bark, and they'll go just underneath the bark into that cambium layer, and then they just eat their crazy pattern underneath it. They go all over the place. Well, it's effectively killing the tree. Once they've gone all the way around, it's basically strangled the tree. They've just strangled the tree. So once they go all the way around, the tree dies. And the tree might look fine, but that cambium layer's been destroyed, and so it's gone. So that's essentially how that works. Fortunately, at Sage Mountain Center, we've had over the years a number of interns, and it's perfect for construction. If you ever have interns, then you'll just really appreciate what they do. If you've ever been an intern, which I'm sure some of us have, we know the labor that can be involved in some of the stuff we've been doing. It's basically the grunt work. So on another side note here in this picture on the right, when we do a lot of chainsaw work, and you want to make the process of processing the logs as easy as possible. And so for us, there's the thickness of a chainsaw is called a kerf. When you cut with a chainsaw, it's going to eat away about 1/4 inch of wood, right? And in Montana, the ideal cordwood length or thickness of the wall is 16 inches. So take note of that. 16 inches will give you about an R32 wall.
Wow.
And that's nicely insulated.
Wow.
The wood density changes, the insulation value, but again, you're still looking at anywhere from R28 to say R32. Anybody know what a conventional stick frame home in Montana is, the insulation value?
I've got really good insulation.
About 13,
R17,
yeah, 17 or 19, yeah.
Wow.
So this is the beauty of it. The other thing that's really nice about cordwood construction is the thermal mass. The ability of energy to absorb into the wall and then re-radiate that energy later. So for instance, how our house operates, it's passive solar like these windows on the south side. The sun streams in the wintertime, dead of winter. It warms up the walls, it warms up our floor, and then when the sun sets, then all these walls and floors re-radiate that for hours. So that means we don't have the heater running. So it becomes like what we call a thermal battery. So the walls can store the energy because there's so much mass there. So when I was getting back to cutting the logs, our chainsaws take off, you lose about 1/4 inch. So I did some calculations and figured in our little pickup truck, if we cut the logs, I think it was 5'5", and then when we make our 16-inch cuts, it gives us exactly 16-inch logs when we're finished. So there's no waste there. And it's just, crunching a few little numbers and testing it out. Then once you get your formula, then you just move forward. So here we are just explaining peeling process, the technique. Okay, so the second part is surrounding the logs with material or mortar. In the trade, it's called a mortar matrix. And I've thought for years, giving these presentations, on a way to demo this that I can bring into a room with me. I still haven't come. I have ideas, but it doesn't work. So bear with me. We're going to use our imaginations. Okay, put your imagination cap on. And so we lay out the logs, and then the mortar, and I'll pass this around too as an example. The mortar goes over the logs on two sides, the inside and the outside. I've got some slides that'll show you. And then sawdust is packed in between. That creates a break between the outside wall, mortar wall, and the inside mortar wall. If this was solid mortar all throughout, mortar or concrete has no insulation value. So heat migrates straight through the wall. So you need to have a thermal break there in constructing that wall.
How thick is cement on each side?
About 4 inches.
What's your R value then with that procedure?
It's about the same, yeah. Because you have 8 inches in the middle of sawdust packed in between these logs. And I've got a picture of those.
Could you use, there are companies that shred denim for your old jeans, or could you use cloth fibers to put in there too? Have you experimented with?
Yeah, so could you use different
That?
types of insulation? Actually, let me come back to that question,
Okay,
because we're
yeah.
just coming up to the inside here. Looking at the mortar, there's a number of cordwood books out there right now that talk about different mortar mixes. I'll show you ours in a moment here, but I came up with a formula that uses our topsoil. We have amazing topsoil up there. There's areas where it's 7 feet deep. And so when we were excavating, we saved all that topsoil and stockpiled it, and then we drew off that over the years for building our buildings. And we've got 3 cordwood buildings up there at our place. So we were just able to draw off the soil right from the land. The cordwood mix, or the mortar mix, consists of, in our case, the sifted topsoil mixed with sand. We use masonry sand, which is it's a small grain sand, very fine. It makes the mortar mix nice and smooth. And then we use wet sawdust, which is very unique. You add the wet sawdust into the mortar mix. That slows the cure down and also makes it more of a lightweight mortar mix. So we've got sand, earth, sawdust, and Portland cement. And that's the hardener. From the sustainable building standpoint, we try to use as little Portland cement as possible because it's so energy intense to manufacture. But Portland cement is an amazing material. I mean, it can last for decades and decades. So in our case, it was a matter of experimenting with different ratios to find the right mix that used the least amount of Portland cement with the most amount of earth from the land, from our site. What I first did is started just with pure dirt, right? Making mud pies, add a little water, and build a little wall. And then I spray a hose onto it, and then I watch it all dissolve. So it's like, okay, we can't use straight earth. That would be great, but we can't. And so I just did a lot of these different ratios experimenting with our material. The recipe you might come up with if you're experimenting with it, and you wanted to use an earth plaster, would be based on the content of your earth. This gets a little bit deeper, but once you get these numbers, then you don't have to think about it anymore. You're looking for a certain amount of clay content and organic matter, and then you're just going to have a little bit of grit or aggregate sand. This is really fascinating to me. I'm working on this, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but this TV program out in Red Lodge, building a cordwood structure. And I took a sample of their soil out there, and this was it. And I'll pass this around. I added water to it and let it dry. I mean, this is incredible. That was it. There's no other amendment in this. And I'm really excited to see how that's going to turn out. It's pretty much solid clay, but there's enough aggregate in it that's holding it together. And so, yeah, check that out. It's pretty fascinating. Our earth content was about 50% clay for our topsoil, and so hence I had to bring in amendments and stuff. If you're not using soil for your mortar mix, the typical fallback is lime. I don't know if you've ever mixed lime and Portland cement or anything. It's nasty to work with. Again, it's energy intense to manufacture, but it adds plasticity to the mortar, so it makes it real comfortable for hands-on. So here's Sage Mountain Center's secret recipe, in case you're interested. And I give you this secret because you would have to have our exact soil that we have at our site. And I know the neighbors across the street have tried it, and it does not work. They have a lot more sand in their topsoil, and it changes the whole ratio. So these are in terms of volume. So it would be like 6 shovelfuls of sand, 4 shovelfuls of sifted topsoil, 4 shovelfuls of wet sawdust, and we'll talk about sawdust in a minute, and 2 shovelfuls of Portland cement. So that's the recipe, and as you start building a little cabin or dog house or greenhouse or addition, whatever, you would have this recipe, and then you would just use that the entire time. That's what you would use to build up your log wall.
What does the organic material give to you?
Question is, what's the organic material give to the mortar mix? If you look closely at most topsoil, healthy topsoil, the organic material is the roots and the fibers and the grasses and stuff, the cellulose that's in there. And what they do is they create like a little web in the mix that holds it together. If you've worked with concrete before, there's these secondary reinforcements you can add to it, sometimes nylon fibers, just to regular concrete. And what that does, that adds to the strength of the mix itself. So in nature, the organic matter adds that component to it. It's very similar to the same principle of adobe homes in the Southwest. You would just have the clay, there's lots of organic matter tying it all together, and then you just build your wall. So you've got the mortar together, your mortar mix, your piles. Next comes looking at how you're going to construct your building, whatever you're building. I'm a big fan of encouraging people to practice with something really small. I've known people over the years that are like really excited, we're just going to build this big old house. And they get about halfway through and either the walls are like this,
Oh, God.
or they're falling apart because they didn't have the mix properly. So practice on something really small, get your technique down, then just go up bigger from there. That's why I keep referencing, a dog house or a chicken coop. I've been helped with a number of chicken coops that works really well. Things like that, and then you can build on from there. There's 2 types of techniques for cordwood construction, and the slides will, in the future, I'll refer back to those later. But the first is load supporting, where you're building your walls up just like this, and you build, say, 4 corners, and your walls just go up like this, and then when you get up high enough, you put some beams across the top and you put your roof on it. Okay, that's load supporting is more common and easier for small buildings, little sheds and stuff. For homes, it's much easier to do what we call post and beam or timber frame. So the difference there is, I don't know if I can demo it here. Let's see. You would have your post and beam framework all in place. Ideally, these are all level and nice and smooth. And then you fill in with cordwood in between. So all the weight and the loads of the roof are on the poles, but the cordwood is basically filling in, adding the insulation. Again, there's lots of variations there, but those are the 2 techniques: the infill technique or the load supporting. So in this example here, this just shows one of the poles getting ready for the cordwood to be installed. And it's a little electrical detail. I worked with the electrical inspector on what would satisfy him to meet code, and this worked fine for him. And again, there's lots of details you can't really see in this slide, but it can be easily done. So now with this picture, I don't know if you can see it too well, this shows the actual inside of the cordwood wall. So this will give you your visual. Here you've got your mortar bed on the inside of the wall, 4 inches. Your mortar bed on the outside of the wall, 4 inches. And then sawdust packed in between. And so think about this. The log actually ties together these 2 walls, the inside and the outside. See how that works? And then in this example here, I'm installing an electrical box, and so I'm able to run my wires just to the inside of the wall. electrical code does not want you to have Romex wire in contact with mortar because the alkaline can eat away the insulation. So as long as this is on the interior of the wall, I can run the wire right up between these posts because that's all filled with sawdust, which is essentially, again, insulation. Anybody have a home here or know of a home that was insulated with sawdust in Butte? Have you seen them at all? I've seen them around Butte. Yeah, you go digging around, and sure enough, people back then, you'd use whatever you could. Well, it works. It's a good insulator. It has some fire issues with it, but the fire issues are mostly related to the framing. Because sawdust needs oxygen to burn, right? It's same as like straw bale construction. You need oxygen to burn. But in this case, the sawdust is encased essentially in concrete. And it's very hard to burn the face of a log. Extremely hard. I don't even know if you can do it. You can stick a blowtorch on here forever and it's just not going to ignite. You know, you put it on the inside of the log, well then it's going to go up. So if you think about from a fire perspective, this is the face of your wall and it's extremely fire resistant. So anyway, does that help with the visual as far as how that wall is put together?
So let's say you build 2 or 3 feet here, and then that mortar dries, and you come back the next day, you're gonna build another couple of feet. Do you have to seal in between the dry concrete and the new wet?
So yeah, the question is, when you're building this, we build it in courses. Usually with cordwood construction, you can go 3 foot at a time, so about up to here, and then you move on to another section. The next day you can come back now and that's set up and you can build the next 3 feet on top of it. The question is, do you have to have some kind of bonding agent or something to match the dry to the wet? And the answer is no. What you would do is, if for instance this was the top course for the day, what I would do is scrape with a brush or something, rough it up. I would rough up this top surface and that top surface here, and then the next day I come in with new wet mortar and just build right on top, and it ties it right in.
I have a question. When you start this, you don't have any sort of foundation or anything, you just put it right on the dirt?
No, there's a foundation. This is the foundation right here. Most
Cement.
concrete, yeah. Most people build, at least this, what I see mostly, is they'll build a cordwood home on a slab, and then they'll put in-floor radiant heat into the slab. So your heating system's in the floor, which are real comfortable. That's what we have at our place. And then you have a nice smooth surface. You'll rough up those edges, just where the wall's going to be. And then when it's time to build your wall right on that perimeter, then you just build up from there. Good question.
Do you do anything to treat the sawdust?
Yeah, so is the sawdust treated at all? There was a school of thought with sawdust early on, where they were coating it with borax or lime, something to deter insects. But over time, everybody's kind of moved more towards just the most basic natural element. The key thing for keeping creatures from living in your walls, which can happen in any home anyway, is making sure you have all of these logs sealed up well right on the face, because that's the only way they can get into the wall. So over years, the first building we built, we coated everything with lime, all the sawdust. And again, it was so nasty, so expensive and toxic to work with. And then in the end, we were like, did we even need to do this? And then we just started going just with straight sawdust, and it was lovely to work with. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it is now, as far as what people are doing.
What do you treat the ends of the logs with?
So yeah, do you have to treat the ends of the logs? No, you don't want to treat them with anything.
We don't.
No, you want the wall to breathe. So we get horizontal rains all the time with storms. They're going to saturate the face of the wall, and I've seen it for years. It usually saturates about maybe 1 inch in, but because it's not sealed, the water's not trapped on the face, and so it can dry out. And that's one of the beauties of cordwood construction. You know, a log home, you're having to seal it all the time. On a cordwood wall, you never want to seal the face of those logs. And I have an example, a story real quick, that testifies to that truth. In our first building, we noticed when we were doing construction or building the wall, we would spray the wall down, hose it down with water at the end of the day to slow the cure. And when we hosed it down, the colors of the log just glowed. I mean, the wall was gorgeous. And we're like, wow, this is amazing. Why don't we just coat the outside surface with linseed oil? Because that's a natural sealer that a lot of people use. And even though, you know, some of the books say don't do that, we're like, okay, let's just coat it. So we coated it, looked gorgeous. After about a week, the vapors from the outside moved into the house. It was into one room, and we had to seal off that room and air it out for like 2 months because it's oil. And so it saturated through the wall, through the logs, and then it just sat there. And that room was toxic for like 2 months. That's how that, okay, now we know why. Don't coat the walls. Oh, let's see, while we're seeing the cutaway of the wall, I might have another one, let's see. Yeah, okay, well, I can put that one on. I wanted to touch base real quick, just on sawdust. You know, when you see a stacked wall home or a cordwood home and you think, oh, you know, firewood, it's so simple. But there's a technique to everything. Well, sawdust is the same thing. You know, when I first got into this, I never imagined that I would be really particular about what kind of sawdust I pick up. And so there's lots of mills around Montana. And so, you know, there's a number of times I've gone out to the mills and they're like, hey, do you have any sawdust? And they're like, yeah, back 40, you know, there's like 10 acres of it. And I'll go out there walking around and then, you know, I'll come back and they're like, well, how much do you want? I'm like, sorry, it's not gonna work. You have very specific kinds of sawdust that you want. You don't want shavings because shavings don't pack down enough on the interior of your wall. Let me go back. So I'll pass this around. This is the perfect grit for cordwood construction, or grade. They're little small chunks, and it depends on the blade that's used to cut the logs. So you don't want shavings because they don't pack well enough to create nice small air pockets for insulation. On the other hand, you don't want cabinet sawdust. Cabinets have very fine saw and very fine blades, and they make it powdery. And powdery will pack the sawdust too tight where there can't be air pockets in between there. So this is the perfect grade of sawdust for the construction. And, you know, luckily, again, it's real standard around Montana.
So you're gonna get some settling at the end of the wall, by the time you build the 8-foot wall?
So, yeah, good question. So, yeah, will you get any settling since you're filling in sawdust in here? As you're building the wall up high, will that sawdust just kind of settle its way down? And the answer is no. Because as you build the wall, you pour the sawdust in. We don't just pour it in and move on. We pour it in, we have imagine this is a trowel, right? And we pack it in real tight. And you pack it in around the logs as you're building.
Okay.
So if this was a wall here spaced about 2 inches apart, that's kind of the standard 2 fingers. We pour the sawdust in here, and then we take this tool and we wedge in nice and tight around every single log. So you go up. So the process of building really is mortar, sawdust, logs. Mortar, sawdust, logs. Mortar, sawdust, logs. And you just work your way up like that.
Labor intensive.
Yeah, keep in mind, this is, it's labor intensive. But again, you know, if you've worked with firewood or any kind of basic construction, it's just repetitive, it's simple, and you just go over and over. The beauty of a cordwood wall is, once it's done, it's probably going to be there for easily over 100 years. And maybe many hundreds of years. As long as you have good drainage around the building, Like any home, you know, it can have water damage, so make sure your roof's not leaking, make sure you don't have flooding around the outsides of your house. We're in a perfect climate for cordwood construction because we have a dry climate, we're high desert. In wetter areas like Seattle, you would want to build in larger overhangs over the building to make sure no water was splashing onto it.
On that mortar, how many parts of water roughly do you use?
There's not really a formula for water. Is that little mud ball around? Typically, we try to go for that. So, you know, depending on how much humidity is outside, how dry your materials are, you add water until you can make a little, almost think of it like a hamburger that doesn't slump. If it flattens out like a pancake, you've got too much water. So you want it to have a nice kind of high ridge to it when you're adding the water. And you get a feel for that as you go on. Good question though, or good point. Let's see. So here's just some walls going up. Here you can see post and beam framework. Here's a window buck preparing the frame for a door, and they're just filling in between. Here's one, a little creative one. This is the inside of our building, one of our buildings. I wanted to create an arch, and so I built a wood form, and then we built the wall around the form, and then once it dried, then we pulled the form out. We have a beautiful arch, and you'll see the finished product here. So laying up the walls. So what's interesting with cordwood construction is you have, you get your piles, your firewood, your earth, your sawdust, your cement mixer, which helps a lot, and you just start mixing and building. You have all your materials, you just start building your wall. Once it's built, you're pretty much finished. So there's not all these different stages of construction. If you've ever done or had remodeling done, you know there's different stages. There's framing, wiring, insulation, sheetrock, finish coat. There's all these stages in construction. With cordwood, you gather your piles, you build, you're done. So.
You're not using like any
Forms?
back, like a back form to?
No. What you do is as you build your wall, we always have a little 4-foot level, and as we do our next course, we just set the level up against it and make sure our wall's not going out like this. It's going nice and straight line to where we want it to go. So, and it's a slow process. It's similar to, again, rock work, any kind of rock work. But yeah, no form, because you want to see the surface of your log, what it's going to look like finished as you're building it. And it's a very creative process. Here you can see the slumps. We go by the handfuls, the slumps of mortar just put into place. Sawdust is poured in. Now the sawdust will be packed in around the logs, and then the outside, the surface of the wall will then be pointed, what they call pointing. They do that in brickwork and stuff, and that pushes the mortar into the logs and seals it really well around those logs. Again, just as if it was brick or stone. Here's a wall.
So you're kind of cleaning up the outside after?
Absolutely. Yep.
When the mud's still wet? And
Yep. Well, because the next day you can't do anything with it. It sets up, and it's too hard to manipulate. So here you can see this is it's kind of hard in this picture, but this is like a morning's work probably, and then here's some of the wetter stuff that was put on these two courses before they were pointed and smoothed out. And the smoothing out, the pointing, is what gives it, sort of the finished product.
So it looks like your mortar is set back in just a little bit for texture.
Yeah, the mortar's set back in. They call that, instead of having the mortar flush with the face of the logs, they call it proud. So we like the logs to be proud about, I don't know, half an inch or an inch. Also keep in mind with cordwood construction, you don't have to be exact. We say 16 inches is what we're shooting for. But sometimes your cuts are going to be at angles and they're going to be weird, and that's part of the character of it. if you're really anal retentive and everything just has to be perfect, like mine, which I've seen some builders do that. Oh my God, it takes years to make. Here's a panel again. You can see the framework, and then we infill. And it's really nice because you can just, work on a weekend, one panel at a time, whatever, cover it up, come back to the other panels as needed.
So on the sides of that wall,
Yep.
how big are your end pieces? Are they just like a 6x6?
The poles.
The poles.
So we use what's called a modified pole unit. You can't get a log, well you can, but I mean, if you're gonna try to get a 16-inch log, you'd be dealing with some big timbers. So we're using logs from our property that are the small timbers, about 4 to 6 inches around.
So on the inside,
So
they're
on-
flush on the outside. What do? Fill in on the inside with shorter logs?
Right, so we have, and I don't know if, let's see if we can see, yeah, you can see here. Okay, so we've got the 6-inch log on the outside. We've got another 6-inch log right here on the inside. So there's 2 of them together. We spread them to take us to 16-inch width, the thickness. Does that make sense? And then this in between here is just filled with sawdust. As you build your wall, you just pack in sawdust. Right here, again, little technique, we just staple on cardboard because it's really convenient, and it's, again, it's just wood fiber, just like sawdust. So, good questions, you guys. There's lots of details to these. I won't spend too much time here since we're getting to the end, but this will be online, so you can look on YouTube and get some of these numbers. These are just some statistics as far as when we do construction, how long it takes to build a section of wall, basic cost. Keep in mind, there is the labor component, but if you're doing something yourself, this is going to be very, very inexpensive.
How long does it take from start to finish, like your place at Sage Mountain?
Well, yeah, the example I like to use is our main house. The slide will come back to it, the big house. The front of that wall is 100 feet long. And Linda and I built that. I was on the outside, she was on the inside wall. It takes 2 people at least. We did that in 13 days.
Wow.
So, and we did have a friend come up. She was mixing the mortar and the cement mixer and bringing it to us. But in 13 days, I mean, we pumped that out.
That's amazing.
And that's just, I mean, we've been doing it for years, of course, so we do it in our sleep. But, I mean, it's very doable. Our guest house, which I've got some pictures in a second, came to $14 a square foot, and the big main house came to $25 a square foot, our own labor. Anybody know what home prices are these days? A cheap house is $125 a square foot. Customs can be easily more than $250 and higher for custom homes. And these were finished, these are our finished buildings, not just the cordwood portion. So you can really save a lot of money and have a good insulated building. These walls are very heavy. Think of a cinder block wall or almost a concrete wall. You think of the materials that went into it. So you want to make sure your foundation is a strong wall, as if you're building, say, for a cinder block wall. And then just face cords. How do you calculate how many logs you need for a given area? Yeah, just some more pictures. Again, you can see the post and beam framework. These are splayed windows. I really like these. We build these frames with recycled wood, and then we flare them out like it is in castles. So you can put in a smaller window, but get more light into the room.
Right. Wow.
And that's the reason why they did it in castles, so that you could have a small opening, but bring more light in. Because cordwood homes are very cozy homes. I mean, I won't call them caves, but they're very solid and dense when you live in one. This is a special coin corner or built-up corner without a post and beam. And again, modeling off of stone masonry. And so it's just utilizing the logs to build your corners.
beautiful.
This is our guest house.
Oh my gosh,
This is
it's gorgeous.
interior. We call this the ivy room. It's not related to cordwood, but we've let this ivy grow for years. And it's just grown all around the entire inside of the room. It's awesome.
Don't let it eat your concrete,
It's not.
because that's what it does to old buildings on the exterior.
He goes a little bit on ours, but he's mostly covering the ceiling right now.
Funny.
Gosh, this is beautiful, beautiful.
That's the face of our main house. That was a picture in the paper. That just shows the interior of the wall. Other little features, you can add glass bottles. That lets light shine through. Some people have built cordwood, well, I guess they wouldn't be called cordwood walls, but glass bottle
Glass
walls
bottle walls.
using the same principle.
Yeah, there's a building like on.
Again, it's very artsy, yeah. You can see, you can save all your beer bottles and wine bottles, put them to use. Since you can't recycle them here, there you go.
But they're not gonna be 16 inches.
So there's a technique for building a glass log. You take a wide mouth masonry jar on one end, that's clear, and say a wine bottle on the other end. You insert it, and you can adjust your thickness.
Okay.
And then we wrap it with tin foil, cardboard, and duct tape.
Wow.
And that becomes our glass log. And then as we're constructing, we say, okay, do we want to put in a jar here? Okay, let's pop it in. And then we just build it into the wall.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Are you trying to maintain a certain ratio of on the face, on the surface there, of concrete per wood? It seems like it's not very dense on wood. Is that structurally intentional?
Oh, right, yeah. A lot of people wonder that, like, why aren't we putting the logs closer together?
Or smaller ones in between?
Or smaller in between, right. There is a certain ratio that you're shooting for, and it's basically 2 inches between each log, right here. So you could put a little teeny log here, for instance, as long as you had 2 inches in between. If the logs are touching, you've got a weak spot, and the wall could crack there, if it's log to log. So really, the strength of the wall is in what we call the mortar matrix. It's this web of mortar that is creating the strength of your wall. And the cordwood is holding the 2 walls together, like I said, plus giving the insulation value as a component of the wall.
So is there, you got the 2-inch minimum, is there a maximum that you should be aware of?
No, I mean, the hard part in cordwood construction is mixing the mortar. So you don't want to have a lot of mortar in your wall because it takes so much work doing it. So really that sweet spot is about 2 inches in between. Any less and it tends to crack a lot, any more and it's too much labor.
How many cords of wood did you use on that? Let's say a 100-foot wall.
It varies a little bit, obviously according to the size of the building. Our main house, I believe, used, I want to say, 5 to 10 cords. Yeah, it's not a whole heck of a lot of wood. Because if you think about it, the logs aren't dense, they're spread out, and so they cover a large area when you're building with it. Here's that finished arch on the inside. And again, yeah, just beautiful walls. And this is all passive solar, so the sun warms it up in the winter time. And then I want to give a little shout out to Rob Roy. He's pretty much the cordwood guru in the United States. He was the first one to publish books on cordwood construction. And I've got a couple up here. You're welcome to write the titles down or something after we're done talking. But I've met him a couple times, and really nice guy. We have our different views and opinions on things, but that's just kind of how cordwood construction is. Most of his work has been done on the East Coast. Yeah, just a great guy and really a pioneer in the technique.
So it looks like he's maybe cut shelves in a couple of logs there to protrude out
Yep,
from the
you bet.
wall.
And
Yeah.
those are bottles?
Yeah, a lot more bottles in this example.
Gorgeous.
You
So-
can embed in the mortar different
Yeah.
Oh,
things.
that's gorgeous.
With the little thinking, you can really plan out.
Oh yeah, you can have shelves. We have some little display shelves in different places. We have built-in benches, so you can take your shoes off, but you don't have legs going down to the floor. They just extend out from the wall, and then we put finished planks on it, and then you can just sit there and take your shoes off, and it's just built into the wall. So there's, yeah, lots of creative things you can do.
So that's his house.
That was a part of his house, yeah. So, yeah, and this is just the southern face of our main house at Sage Mountain Center.
Is that the 13 days?
Yeah, this is the 13 days right here, that face. And,
I thought that was all stone when I first saw it.
yeah, and that's kind of the idea we're shooting for. But like I said, we offer different things going on at Sage Mountain Center through the summer. Field trips, Airbnb, retreats. We have some hiking trails we developed up there. We've got one of the larger labyrinths in the United States. So we're available for labyrinth walking if you've ever done that. And then our organic gardens. We do tours all the time. So if you haven't been up to our place yet, just email me or my card's here, and we can set something up and go from there. We're a little over time, yeah.
2 questions. Earthquake resistance, and do you even insure this?
Yeah, this is all insured. It's a log home, right? Earthquake, yeah, it's been through the earthquakes we've had around here. My felt things all like this, but I haven't seen any cracking. A lot of it is, if you think of it, the strength is in the post and beam structure. And so you have a tremendous amount of lateral strength because it's filled up with solid mortar in between there, as opposed to the house tipping over this way. But it's how you design it with braces and stuff.
And you also have some straw bale in there too, right?
Yeah, our buildings are also, we have straw bale construction at Sage Mountain Center as well. And again, all kinds of solar stuff. Lots of cool things. Last minute questions? Yeah.
How are we gonna get at this lodge pole? Everything we see, well, like up here, we got it down, it gets damn mad, it's all sitting there, nobody can parse it for some reason.
Yeah, you
We
can,
got a packet of 1,000 feet, and we're down here between here and
Yeah.
the hill, and this little claimers can't do that.
sure.
Where are we gonna get all this wood?
Yeah, just go to BLM or Forest Service, ask them.
I property to build, I tell you that. They don't-
Oh, really? Oh, that's weird. Yeah, here, firewood permit, you just go on the side of the highway and cut your tree down.
Well, it's not there, it's all back 1,000 feet now. They
Sure.
let us skid it with a four-wheel.
Right.
It's getting difficult to get.
Yeah, it is, especially if there's water areas and stuff in the area.
Oh,
But
no, it is, it's $1,500 roughly for a log truck, self-load with a green wheel.
yeah. And that's another option. People do that. They'll have a semi bring a load in. But there's lots of back roads around this area. At least I'm not sure about Dillon, but you don't have a problem getting dead standing lodgepole pine around
There's a
here.
lot up towards Storm Lake.
Sure.
Up
Oh, it's
towards
all over.
Elbert,
It's all
yeah.
over. Yeah. So,
Do
any
you-
last questions?
Do you purchase your sawdust? Do you go and say, I'm gonna need this
Do we buy
much?
the sawdust? Let's see, it depends on the mood of the guy that you talk to. That's what we've noticed. Sometimes they're like, yeah, take as much as you want. We can't get rid of this stuff. And then other guys are like, oh yeah, $5 a dump truck load or something. So it's not much.
Okay.
Where did you get yours?
We get ours at, in Clancy. We've gotten a whole bunch from Clancy. We've got a lot out of Butte here. Who is it who runs the Dick out there? Yeah.
Down Dick.
Yeah, and let's see, yeah, I think those are the 2 main sources for sawdust around here. So, great. Okay, so if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them after we're done here, but I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.